Welcome to another winter webinar here with Preservation Virginia. My name is Will Glasgow. I'm the CEO. And just a reminder about our organization before we really kick things off here. We operate 6 historic sites open to the public from Hanover County to Virginia Beach. So we try to put our preservation money where our mouths are in terms of the work we do at those sites to educate the public. We also advocate for preservation policy in all levels of government. I was just down at the General Assembly this morning, and we have a community outreach team and restoration team who provide advice and consultation on preservation issues. And lastly, I just want to give a shout out to our archaeological team at Jamestown Rediscovery down near Williamsburg. They're performing world-renowned research on the foundings of the United States. So we're a very diverse organization doing a lot of different work across the Commonwealth. Um, I guess a couple of quick housekeeping things. Before we kick things off, just keep in mind that we're going to do a Q&A session at the end of today's program. Please use the Q&A function or the chat feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen there. Feel free to throw questions in, and then at the end of the session, I'll present your questions to the panel today. And maybe to kick things off, if you could type maybe where you're tuning in from, we'd love to see what parts of the state or the country y'all are participating in the webinar from today. We absolutely have a rock star panel for you here today. I'm really thrilled that everyone agreed to participate in this. We really appreciate y'all helping out with this conversation. There are a lot of discussions around housing and affordability right now, so we just wanted to throw some ideas and some perspectives at y'all to get you thinking about how historic preservation will fit into the affordable housing solution, but also how to answer questions from developers and localities as some of these debates really take root in your communities. Our panel here today really understand the business of preservation, as well as its benefits to education and quality of life. So I'm going to start with a few quick introductions here. First up, we have our Public Policy Committee Chair, Jenny Keller, on the call, which we're thrilled to have you here, Jenny. Jenny teaches at UVA and is principal of Land and Community Associates. She's chaired Preservation Virginia's board, as well as the board of Preservation Piedmont in Charlottesville. So she really understands preservation work on local, state, and federal level. So thank you, Jenny.
Good morning.
Good morning. And next we have Paige Pollard of Commonwealth Preservation Group. Paige is also on Preservation Virginia's board, so we have a great representation here on the panel today from our organization. Paige was with the Department of Historic Resources for years before striking out on her own. Her firm specializes in assisting with historic tax credit projects, National Register listings, and much more. So thank you, Paige. Next, we're excited to have Marlo Green join us today. Marlo was a Preservation Virginia Fellow in 2025, focusing her research on Pocahontas Island and Petersburg. She's the Director of Financial Compliance and Operations at Virginia State University. And Marlo is spearheading her own affordable housing efforts in Petersburg, which is really exciting. So thank you, Marlo. And finally, our keynote here today is Donovan Ripkema, Principal at Place Economics out of Washington, D.C. Donovan's firm specializes in the economics of historic preservation, conducting studies, surveys, and workshops throughout the nation. He's really our go-to guy if we need some macro perspective on preservation in Virginia, and we're very grateful that his firm is right up the street, and he's always willing to help us out when we have something like this going on. So thank you, Donovan. Before I turn things over to the panel, just a quick update for our friends and supporters on this call about the General Assembly session and kind of where we're at. It's definitely been a busy session so far, and I'm a little bit new at this. This is my second session as the CEO of Preservation Virginia. But our government relations expert, Zach Lemaster out of Gentry Locke, has been incredibly helpful and is keeping us informed as to what's going on. First of all, to start off really quickly about some budget amendments that are out there. We've been pushing really hard to see more funding for the BIPOC fund, the Black, Indigenous, and People of Color Historic Preservation Grant Program, which is administered by the Department of Historic Resources. Demand for that grant has really gone through the roof the last couple of years. I think they had more than 50 requests for $20 million in funding last year, but they had $2 million to give out. So it just goes to show the need that's out there, especially with some of the federal grant programs going away for the foreseeable future. So Second of all, there is a contingency funding budget amendment for the Department of Historic Resources. And again, that gets back to federal funding. Should there be budget cuts to the Historic Preservation Fund, DHR might need a little bit more help from the state to make up that budget gap. And Delegate Paul Krizik did carry an amendment to support DHR in the event that federal funding should go away. And lastly, a little bit self-serving, but one of the historic sites that we own is Patrick Henry Scotchtown in Hanover County. We're looking to update our fire suppression system at Scotchtown. This seems like a really important year to do a project like that during 2026 and the big 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. So we're doing a lot of private fundraising around that work, but of course, support from the state would be a huge help. Fire suppression systems are incredibly expensive. So we're hoping that they see the value and the work we're doing out there at Scotchtown. Moving along quickly, there was a proposed independent college preservation and maintenance fund that came before a committee this morning. Unfortunately, that was tabled for now, so it might be a next year kind of bill that comes up again. But the idea is that many of the independent colleges in Virginia have historic campuses, a lot of historic buildings, but there isn't a state mechanism for Commonwealth support to maintain those properties. So we are advocates of that. We think it's a great idea coming from former Delegate Chris Peace. But unfortunately, it looks like it's going to be tabled this year. But any buckets that we can create for preservation funding seems like a good thing. So we're supportive of that in the future. And I did want to say that there appears to be no changes at this time to the historic rehabilitation tax credit program here in Virginia. This is an issue we work really hard on every year, not just during session, but between session. In the summer and fall, we meet with staff of the General Assembly, with elected officials on certain committees to make the case for how important historic tax credits are to the overall economy of Virginia and to historic sites throughout the state. So we're very grateful that that hasn't really come up yet. It seems like every few years there might be conversation around, changing or capping the program, and that doesn't seem to be the case now, and we're really happy about that. But moving on to housing, that takes us to housing. So housing and affordability are definitely like the hot button issues of this year's session. What we've really worked hard to try to understand is how some of these initiatives are going to impact historic preservation. And frankly, we've been working really hard to make the case that preservation is part of the affordability answer. I think just on a national scale, a lot of the conversations have resulted in preservation groups and neighborhood associations being associated with anti-change, anti-growth and development, and infill. I think that there's a balance there that we all need to work towards in terms of what does appropriate infill and construction look like. How can the rehab of existing building stock and the environmental incentives for doing that be coupled with new construction? So again, we're working really hard to define all that, but things are moving very, very quickly. There were 39 affordable housing bills that were sent to me to review in the last 2 weeks. So it's just sort of a litany, like a long list of things that we're trying to wrap our heads around. There's two in particular I just wanted folks on the call to know that we really kind of keyed in on from a statewide historic preservation perspective. One would be Senate Bill 454 from Senator Van Valkenburg. This bill calls for 75% of land in commercial or business zones to be allowed to have by right development for multifamily housing. Senate Bill 388 from Senator McPike allows religious organizations and churches to build affordable housing on their property, on their parcels. And the reason why we kind of honed in on those is there really wasn't any language about historic districts. What is this going to mean for historic downtowns and that kind of thing? We understand that really the goal of these bills is to remove what is perceived as inappropriate red tape that really slows down construction. But it is, again, it's a really fine line that we're having to walk because we really applaud religious organizations for wanting to be part of the affordable housing solution. That's really a wonderful thing that churches want to step out and do that. But as you know, a lot of churches are in historic districts. So what will some of these buildings look like, or how tall will they be? That kind of thing. It's just these details. Our role is to try to really dig into that and understand this a little bit better. There is concern that these bills could essentially override architectural review boards or bypass them completely. How can we ensure that preservation best practices are followed? Or even worse, could they result in demolitions for the sake of density? So we're working hard with the teams of both Senator Van Valkenburg and Senator McPike. To their credit, they've been really wonderful about hearing us out and considering some amended language for these situations, but we still have a long way to go on that front. We're really trying to make the case that the tax incentives that are created by historic districts are part of the affordable housing solution. However, for example, if a historic district loses too much integrity, if there's too much change or too many demolitions, I mean, eventually we might find ourselves in a place where those locations or those districts could be delisted. So at that point, those federal tax credit incentives could go away. So y'all can imagine that this is again is a very delicate conversation. We don't want to be perceived as anti-housing, but at the same time, we don't want historic preservation to get kind of lost in the conversation as we're speaking to some of these elected officials in the coming weeks. So with that, that's basically some context as to where we're at with Preservation Virginia. But I would like to turn it over to our esteemed panel, who are going to cover things like the developer's perspective, local affordable housing initiatives in Petersburg and the research happening there, and then of course that sort of larger macro national conversation that Donovan and his team have been working so well on. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and put Paige Pollard on the spot and have Paige come online here and share her screen, and we'll start the presentation.
Thank you, Will. All right, let's see if I can do this as seamlessly as when we practice. Here we go. Can you guys see this?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So Will had asked me in my role as tax credit consultant and also as a person who works with community organizations and local architectural review boards to really talk about the developer's perspective on affordable housing and rehabilitation tax credits. And I thought it would be good to kind of establish a base foundation so that everyone on the call can follow through, sort of general information, and then I'll go to a couple of specific examples that would apply hopefully to urban and rural communities. So I think it's important to understand when a developer is looking at any deal, whether it's new construction or historic rehabilitation, often they're looking at four key considerations. How much time is the project going to take? Both time in terms of their time planning, but also duration for construction until they get to the point of actually having a building that tenants are occupying where they're realizing rent revenue. How complex is the project going to be? How much risk are they taking aboard, both financial risk and also risk in terms of uncertainty or unknowns? And then what's the reward? Those four considerations really drive the decision-making process, at least in my experience, for most of our clients. So if you begin to look at how those might be applied to new construction, I did a little bit of research. I'm not trying to compete with Don. I know he's got a far greater depth of knowledge in this area, but based on just very light research, it looks like in 2024, the U.S. Census Bureau Construction Spending Report found that the average new construction project from a decision to pursue to delivery took a little bit over 2 years. And that the risks in 2024 were actually...
Oh, hey, Paige, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I think it's been a little bit hard for folks to hear you. I'm not sure if you can maybe move just a little closer to your mic or something like that.
Okay. Is this better?
Yeah, folks, if you could throw in the chat, can we hear Paige a little better now?
Let's see if I can turn up volume. Is that better?
Sounds like it is. Thanks, Paige. Sorry about that.
That's okay. So in some very light research I did about new construction activities, it looks like in 2024, the U.S. Census Bureau Construction Spending Report found that new construction, typically from the beginning of an idea to delivery of the final product, took just slightly over 2 years, and had seen reduced risks for developers, including improvements in the supply chain since COVID, and also a little bit more predictability in terms of the process of getting to construction. Also, it's noted in the development community that new construction is relatively predictable. And that's predictability is both in terms of the risk and the complexity, as well as the reward. So, as the development community evaluates project costs, typically for a multifamily development, which is just the sector that I chose to analyze, the cost per residential unit, which is also referred to as cost per key, is typically between $150,000 and $200,000. And if you look at the Virginia VHDA rent allowances, I picked two communities because these are the examples I'm going to use later on in the presentation. You can see that the rent rate that's allowable for affordable housing in Franklin ranges from a little over $800 to $1,051, depending on unit size. And then in the city of Norfolk, where I'm located, almost $1,500 for a studio to a little bit over $1,700 for a two-bedroom apartment. So just keep those key figures in mind while we move on to what does a historic building look like. So for a similar category, multifamily construction, the typical timeline for a rehabilitation project that meets the Secretary's standards is about 24 to 36 months. That's from the moment that a developer decides to pursue a building all the way to the moment that a tenant might occupy. Some of the risks that we hear about most often are finding qualified contractors who really understand the expectations for preservation, and also additional review processes and the time those take, particularly if they're staggered. And the complexity in recent years has revolved largely around unpredictable community expectations. Some communities are inviting increased density by revitalization of buildings. Others are concerned about it. And then also a lack of knowledge and understanding of, at the developer level, of what preservation requirements are. There is a reward that's unique to historic rehabilitation, and that is the tax credit upside for the historic rehabilitation tax credits. And also often well-done projects enjoy a huge amount of community support. So for historic rehabilitation, this is just based on our project files. The cost per residential unit, or the cost per key, is about $150,000 to $200,000, just like for new construction. And the rent, according to VHDA, is the same as well. So the reward in terms of financial return is equal to new construction. So that begs the question, if the risk is greater for historic rehabilitation, but the reward is largely the same, then how can we as preservationists really encourage rehabilitation of historic buildings over new construction? So I've pulled together two examples from our project files. One is Hayden High School, which is located in Franklin, Virginia, which is a relatively rural community here about 45 minutes or an hour from Norfolk. This building was hugely important to the community, in part because of its demonstration and embodiment of the story of the fight over both equalization and desegregation of schools, as shown in the city of Franklin, but in terms of the larger context statewide as well. It had a very active alumni network that spent years working with the city to ensure that the school was preserved, and then also to identify the right team to rehabilitate and eventually operate the facility. So here's a picture of Hayden High School when we started work on the project in 2009. And then here's a picture of it completed. You'll notice that's 11 years later. It took far longer for this project to come online than the typical rehabilitation project. Here's a typical interior. And here's a typical interior post-renovation. Wanted to talk a little bit about the sort of high-level facts about the Hayden High School renovation. As I mentioned, new construction and typical rehabilitation projects take approximately 2 years plus or minus. In this case, it took 11 years from inception of the idea to occupancy. In part, that's because the property is owned by a nonprofit organization called Senior Services of Southeastern Virginia. They were inexperienced with historic rehabilitation and even development, but they were committed to the project and they were committed to the community. One of the other risks in any project of this type of duration is that there was team turnover in every facet. The executive director of the nonprofit organization changed. The staff assigned to the project changed. The architect changed. The contractor changed. And eventually they brought in a developer partner to help them navigate the process. There was also a huge amount of complexity because in addition to wanting to make sure that the renovation met the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation and therefore got historic tax credits, they also sought HUD funding for a portion of their programming. They had to acquire the property from the city. And there was a very invested community that wanted to be part of the process all the way through. So complexity can be, positive or negative, but it just adds to the overall project, demands. But the reward was also high for this community in that they ended up with 28 senior affordable housing units, a medical facility on site, a transportation hub for their seniors, a meals program, a community space, and also that's located immediately adjacent to an active school and a child care program. So for the residents as well as the community, this was a big win. What was the cost of this rehabilitation? Well, here you go again. The cost per unit, per residential unit, is approximately $150,000 in 2020 dollars. And that's an estimate because they had all of these ancillary uses that took portions of the building. But essentially, the rehabilitation cost was about the same as what it would have cost to do new construction, or had there been a more efficient private sector development opportunity for the rehabilitation. And the current rent rate is $1,250 per one-bedroom unit. So this is right in line with those general statistics that I presented at the beginning. I'm going to give you one other example, and then we're going to talk about how do we kind of achieve these types of results as a preservation community. My second example is Talbot Park Apartments, which is phase 1 is complete and phase 2 is currently underway. Again, kind of the community focus of this project is that it was one of the original garden apartment complexes built with Federal Housing Association support, responding to the population increase in Norfolk in the 1930s and 40s. It was designed by a local architect and constructed by the Harvard Housing Corporation, commissioned by Fred Trump and James Rosati of the Talbot Park Apartments. And it had been pretty consistently affordable housing in our community, but it had also suffered from deferred maintenance and deterioration, eventually resulting in a small fire that dislocated some of the tenants. The other thing about the buildings that is important is it's a centrally located, very sturdily constructed garden apartment complex in an established neighborhood that really values the scale and density of those buildings. Here's a picture we found of someone working in their kitchen in the Talbot Park Apartments shortly after they were completed. This is actually the mother of our former archivist at the city of Norfolk. And here's a photograph of one of the completed buildings just taken about a month ago. Here's a before image showing some of that fire damage. And then here's an after image of the completed renovation of this unit. So the fast facts for Talbot Park Apartments are that the timeline for this project is approximately 3 years, and that's from inception to completion, including a very efficient project designed by a very experienced developer who's used to using low-income housing tax credits and historic tax credits as well. There were a lot of risks associated with this, including that the property was not listed on the National Register when they started work. And so the project design really demanded tight timelines so that the tax credit investor, the ultimate purchaser of the tax credits, could be comfortable with the success of the project. There was also complexity because they were utilizing low-income housing tax credits as well as the historic tax credits. There are a lot of inherent conflicts in those two programs about treatment of building materials, replacement materials in particular, expectations for ADA, and a lot of other building code issues. So that creates a lot of coordination and compromise on both sides through both programs. Another completely unanticipated complexity is that the National Register listing, which was on a tight deadline, was also being sent through the National Park Service for review during a federal furlough period. And then lastly, there was a bit of an uncertain community perspective because many of these units were occupied and folks were going to have to leave their units in the interest of renovating them to make them more viable for the long term. And so that tenant base had differing opinions on whether this project was beneficial or not. But the reward for our community was huge in that it took these long-standing 295 affordable housing units and brought them up to modern standards. So let's look quickly at the financials. As I said, this project phase 1 is complete and phase 2 is underway. The cost per residential unit is going to be approximately $150,000 to $175,000. And phase 1 is available for rent if you're interested, with the 1 bedrooms going for just over $1,000 per unit and the 2 bedrooms just over $1,200 per unit. So these are 2 very successful projects that really illustrate a lot of the typical risks for historic rehabilitation. There are many additional layers of review. Some of those can be concurrent, some have to be sequential. There's also uncertainty for the development community about the decision makers in these additional layers of review. There's the design team. How knowledgeable are they about historic properties and about how to approach rehabilitation of historic properties? Are the ARB members knowledgeable about this particular property type or about some of the constraints brought by some of the funding programs that are necessary? Planning commission members and city council members have to be considered, both for their political perspective as well as their understanding of the pressures of development. In our area, we deal with the floodplain, which is always a challenge. Then there's site plan review because sometimes there's inadequate parking or setbacks or tree canopy, as well as the code official. And then even once you've got a building permit, the city inspectors who are inspecting those permit applications. There are extra challenges during the process of design and permitting, including how the building code is applied, how the design guidelines for a local community might be applied, as well as that mentioned before, the low-income housing tax credits, how flood mitigation measures can be implemented, how to respond to unforeseen conditions when you begin peeling away layers of neglected materials or mechanical equipment, etc. Also, there's a limited pool of qualified contractors in a lot of our communities, and those things can lead to additional carrying costs or time for a project that are difficult for a developer to predict adequately. And then lastly, when you're talking about affordable housing, if you're using any of the government programs, there are lease rate limitations. So you don't have the capacity to absorb unanticipated costs by changing your lease rates. So with all of that in mind, the question becomes, how can preservationists actually encourage preservation and achieve success? And what we found in working with communities and developers, we are often in the role of translator. It's really helpful for developers to understand what are the important historic assets in the community. Has the community had a conversation? Do they have kind of a collective goal for how those historic assets should be treated? Are there any areas where the community can be flexible? maybe allowing for less parking requirement, or maybe allowing for more flexibility on the interior treatment if the exterior is preserved intact. What are the deal breakers? Are there places in your community's process where there is delay inherent in the system that can be solved? Are there ways to handle concurrent review? Some communities will have a pre-development meeting with all of the players in the city or local government sitting at the table with the developer to understand collectively what are all of the variables that need to be taken on board. And most importantly, we can be proactive about what we think our community assets are, proactive and communicative. And so I guess the last thing I would say is that I was talking to a city attorney one time who said to me that the most successful preservation projects are conducted by deal makers rather than deal breakers. So how can we encourage preservation in a positive way and reduce barriers that still protect our historic assets? Because if developers see fewer barriers, they will always be inclined to pursue preservation projects first. They love the community support and pride that comes out of those projects when they're achieved and executed well. So that is what I wanted to share. And I'll stand by for questions.
Hey, thank you so much, Paige. And I think it's easy for us in the preservation world that, even though we have a lot of friends who are developers or work in that space, in the construction space, it's hard to see their point of view on these things and kind of understand, as far as their financial decisions and what they get involved with, where they're coming from. So this is really, really helpful. And I'm sitting in a room right now. I'm in the historic Cold Eggs house in Richmond, which was a historic tax credit project. So I have this awesome mantle behind me because we were able to utilize tax credits to preserve one of Richmond's oldest buildings here in the city. But basically, the inertia in the General Assembly and the legislation that's out there, change is coming, and it's coming quick. I mean, we're doing all we can to make the case for historic preservation, and preservation policy important to folks making these decisions downtown. But um, it feels like this is going to happen. So how are we going to pull together and work to find a path forward that saves cultural resources while knowing that that development is right around the corner here? So thanks again, Paige. And I have a couple questions for you, so we'll save those to the end here. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Marlo Green. And Marlo, you're literally living this in Petersburg with some of your own initiatives there at Pocahontas Island. So thanks again for being here today.
Yes, and thank you so much for having me. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marlo Green. I'm a CPA. I'm located in the city of Petersburg. I work in finance at Virginia State University, which is a HBCU located right outside of Petersburg. I also operate a CPA firm that specializes in nonprofit accounting and compliance. I've lived in Petersburg for almost 10 years. This year marks 10. And I purchased my first home in 2016, right off of West High Street. Because I work at VSU, I traveled up and down the MLK Bridge into Colonial Heights to get to VSU. And I just never knew that a community was right below me. And so during COVID, I came across a video of a gentleman named Richard Stewart, and he was speaking about a place called Pocahontas Island. And when I realized it was located right in Petersburg, I started researching the community and learning about it, more about its history, because I didn't know this place existed, right? And so eventually I was able to meet Mr. Stewart, who was the individual who created the Black History Museum on Pocahontas Island. And so I asked him to sell me some land. And so he said no. And the reason why he said no was because someone else had recently purchased some land and they did nothing with the homes or the property. So, and these homes are still blighted today. So I understood why he didn't want to sell me any land. He didn't trust me yet, right? So what I told him that day, I was like, sir, I'll be back when I'm ready to break ground. I was like, you gonna show up, right? He's like, yeah. I'm like, all right, bet. So not long after that conversation with him, I learned that the city actually had about an acre of land on Pocahontas Island that I could actually acquire. So what I did, I had never done this before. Keep in mind, I'm just a CPA. I'm a number cruncher person. So I researched the property and actually was able to do a proposal to purchase that acre of land, and I built my primary residence here. So I moved in around about was that August 2023, and so I've been here ever since. Huge smart. All right, so Pocahontas Island, where are we? What's going on? This image is an aerial view of Pocahontas Island. And as you can see from the map here, or the picture here, is that the Appomattox River runs right here. There was a 1915 diversion channel. The water, based on my understanding, used to be on this side, but this diversion channel caused it to come here. And I'm not exactly sure. I can't remember why that was done. But at any rate, my house is located right here, and I own this acre to the right of the house, if you guys see me pointing. I'm actually working to acquire a few lots down here from the city for my affordable housing project. And just to give you a little bit more information about where we are exactly, this is the MLK Bridge here. So that's the bridge that brings you into the island, or you could also access the island directly from Old Town Petersburg, which is right here. This site here is the Roper lumber site. Some folks may be familiar with it. I mean, they moved back in, I want to say like the probably early 2000s or something, and been shut down ever since. The city has actually received a $2.5 million grant from DCR to do some abatement work over here because there's some flooding concerns. And so they're going to use it as just open green space. And I'm going to tell you guys, I am so excited about that idea because I can only see concerts and good times happening right around the corner. So the other thing I want to point out here is the Harborfront, which is right here close to Old Town. And that's where they have the 4th of July celebration. So a lot of us on Pocahontas Island, we sit on our porches and watch the fireworks. So that's how fabulous it is to live in this community. And I mean, I had lived in Petersburg for a very long time, and this is the quietest community I feel like in Petersburg. And there's so much support here. My mom passed away almost 2 years now. And when I tell you, I needed to move here for, it's like it was ordered for me to move here. So then that way I had that support when my mom passed. That's what it feels like. So let's move right along. And sorry for my rambling, you guys. I tend to do that because I get excited. All right, so a little bit about the historic community. So this is just a historical overview of Pocahontas Island. It helps explain why preservation here matters so much to me and hopefully everyone else. The map that you see on the left here is an early plat of Pocahontas Island. It shows how intentionally the community was laid out along the Appomattox River, which has always been central to life, trade, and movement here on the island. The island was first surveyed in 1749 as Whittentown, and it was later renamed to Pocahontas in 1752. And that reflects how native imagery is often used, during Virginia's period of settler expansion, right? By the early 1800s, Pocahontas Island became one of the oldest free Black communities. It offered refuge, stability, and resilience in the face of slavery, and systematic exclusion. That legacy is foundational to the community's identity today. So it's such a layered history when you really think about it. I mean, you have indigenous folk here, free Black individuals, all working class people. It really led to Pocahontas being listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 2006. And that designation was expanded in 2023, where they included more of the Native American heritage and some of the civil rights history as well. What's important to understand is that Pocahontas Island isn't historic because of just of a single building or moment. It's historic because of continuity, people living, working, owning land, and building community here across centuries. That continuity is what we're trying to protect today. So why does it all matter? Okay, I think I already told you that, but I'm gonna just reiterate. So, like I said, again, Pocahontas Island is one of the oldest African-American communities in the nation, but its story is also deeply rooted in Native American presence along the Appomattox River. The Jared House represents a rare, tangible point where these histories intersect. The property was owned by Lavinia Sampson, a free Pamunkey woman, and later by the Jared family, a free Black family, for over 112 years. The transition reflects the lived relationships between Indigenous and African American communities that help define the identity and resilience of this place. This history is not all abstract, it still stands, right? When we talk about preservation here, we're talking about recognizing who has historically carried the costs without sharing in its benefits, right? So Pocahontas Island has long absorbed the impacts such as industrial encroachment, including there's a treatment plant located on Pocahontas Island, which serves several localities. And if I ask you the question of how much do you think they put into the neighborhood, that would be a goose egg of zero. And so that's something we're working towards. I think the challenge with them, and I'm not speaking badly against them. I think the challenge is they didn't know what to support. So now we're going to give them things to support. So against that backdrop, It's the Jarrett House, like again, which is more than just a historic structure. Like I said, it's from the 1800s, and it kind of anchors the neighborhood and Black land ownership, indigenous presence, and self-determination. So that is why this story matters. I feel like I brought that home for you guys. So I want to transition to pause here really quick to introduce a phrase that really shaped how I think about this work. Preservation is resistance. That language actually comes directly from Viola Baskerville. It was during my 2025 summer fellowship with Preservation Virginia. And I have to acknowledge her because it captures something so important. For me, preservation as resistance isn't just an idea, it's a set of actions. On Pocahontas Island, resistance looks like choosing to build when disinvestment has been normalized. It looks like learning how development works so it can be done responsibly. It looks like organizing as a nonprofit, bringing in resources and making sure the community benefits from growth rather than being displaced by it. What I'm about to show you next is the 2023 groundbreaking ceremony that we held when I built the first home in over 30 years on Pocahontas Island. That moment represents when preservation moved from theory to action for me, when I stepped into development as a tool for resistance. From there, I'll walk through how that work expanded into formation of OCR Community Empowerment Group in 2024, the training and the education I pursued to build housing responsibly, and how all that work now connects to preserving the Jarrett House and the broader future of Pocahontas Island. So with that framing, preservation is resistance through action, I want to show you where the work began. All right, so I'm gonna bring up this video. It's only 2 minutes, guys. Let's see here. Crossroad of change. This is a time to awaken the community and educate citizens on the history of Pocahontas Island. In 2014, VCU prepared a neighborhood revitalization plan. It included the development of the Roper site and the community at large. However, it's been 9 years since that plan was drafted, and none of those plans have been materialized. I am no longer accepting things I cannot change. I'm changing the things I cannot accept. Angela Davis. Historically, Black neighborhoods have been disenfranchised and overlooked for large-scale development projects. It is our responsibility to save our communities as no one else will. We must have a willingness in our hearts to work together for the greater good and to not overlook those efforts folks before us. Let's build upon what they have already established and make it better by rebuilding the sense of community through our engagements with each other. Let's establish strategic partnerships with nonprofits, private entities, local and state government to entice other developers who understand how to revitalize the neighborhood through culture, community, and creativity. I have a burning desire to see this neighborhood thrive, become an essential part of the city at large. We're hoping that others share our vision so that we can make our dreams into a reality. And I just look forward to all the changes we're making in this community. Thank you.
Target stores, but especially Pocahontas Island, being the oldest Black community in the United States. I mean, free slaves lived here. Marlon is definitely doing a great gesture to the community.
Thought as a thought, and now you're ready to see it through. Not going to the next and make sure that happens some more, But it can be done, this is living proof.
It's important to have other African Americans to come in and to buy into what the history is and to preserve that history.
So we can't ignore that. And we have to make sure that whatever revitalization we do pays respect to the history of this island.
So I want to tell you guys one thing about that video that I love so much. And what's so powerful about it is that the videographer
in Athens, Georgia, a Black neighborhood erased.
It's the first time I ever saw my mom cry when she realized property can be taken from you.
Descendants.
That's what happens when you share videos directly from YouTube. So let me get back to my presentation. I apologize, you all. I'm a little nervous too.
Yeah, you're fine, Marlo. It does the autoplay, right? Yeah. It's all good.
All right, so guys, what I really love about the video and what's so powerful about it is that the videographer didn't know Richard Stewart when he filmed this video. And yet, if you look closely, Richard appears in the second to last photograph. At the time, the videographer, to his perspective, that was just another face in the community. But in reality, he was one of the most important storytellers and advocates for the neighborhoods. I'm just always, giggly about that part of it. But this video here, that moment really captures what Pocahontas Island is about. So much of its history exists in plain sight. often unnoticed unless you take time to look a little closer. So once I started living in the community, my perspective shifted. Being on Pocahontas Island made it clear that the work wasn't just about construction. It was about history, people, and place. I began learning the story of the community, talking with residents, and understanding what was really at stake. That's when I became a preservationist officially, not through formal training at first, but through proximity and just lived experiences. And it was also when I realized that the community needed a place-based organization. All right, so in 2024, we established OCR Community Empowerment Group, which is a 501c3 nonprofit, place-based nonprofit, focused exclusively on Pocahontas Island. Being place-based matters when you focus on one neighborhood, the impact compounds. If we're able to bring $150,000 a year directly into the community, that's not symbolic. That's real money going directly into the neighborhood. It allows us to be intentional about revitalization, preservation, and the quality of life, work in such a way that broader citywide approaches often cannot. That's what's so important about place-based. Another core part of our approach is collaboration with other nonprofits. Too often, nonprofits end up competing for the same grants, and one organization wins and another one loses. The position that we take is different. We write grants, we intentionally write them with other nonprofits in them, especially those that have expertise that we do not have. A good example of that is the $75,000 grant we received last year. And what we're doing with that is invasive species removal, trail cleanups, environmental education, and the development of a parks and green space master plan. That technical work is not our specialty at all. I'm just an accountant. So we partnered with FOLAR, who are environmental specialists. And that's Friends of the Lower Appomattox, guys. I'm sorry for using the acronym. We wrote them directly into our grant, so they would be able to lead the training for our staff, volunteers, and community participants. And they were compensated for that time. And we made sure they got good money for that as well. This kind of collaboration allows our nonprofit to do meaningful work without pretending to be experts in everything, because we are not. It breaks down operational silos and creates a synergy instead of duplication, which ultimately strengthens the entire nonprofit ecosystem in our city. In addition to grants and planning work, we also focus on cultural engagement, because preservation isn't just about buildings, it's also about places and the stories of those people, right? One way we do that is through our Stories by Candlelight series, which uses music to tell local and Virginia history stories in an accessible and community-centered way. For example, our upcoming concert we have on Valentine's Day focuses on the story of love through historic narratives. We'll tell the story of the Lovings, which is the case that changed interracial marriage in the country. The story of the Maggie Walker and Armstead, highlighting partnership and legacy. And a tribute to Martin Luther King, because his birthday just passed, his story with Miss Coretta Scott King. These stories are shared through live stream music and narrative, creating a cultural experience that connects history, place, and community. And that is a live string quartet with 2,000 candles. Just throwing that out there too. Ultimately, everything we do ties back to our long-term goals on Pocahontas Island, expanding workforce housing so residents can stay in the community, and preserving the Jarrett House as a cornerstone of the neighborhood's history. For us, preservation and affordability aren't just they're not competing ideas, they're inseparable. So now we're going to move forward to our project here. All right, so I call it Pathways to Prosperity. And so this is a 5-year project to deliver 20 new single-family homes on Pocahontas Island. The goal is a mixed income neighborhood with a balanced blend of workforce and market rate homes. Every home is designed to respect the island's historic character while bringing in modern, energy efficient construction. New construction should strengthen, not erase, the identity of this community. The homes will average about 1,600 square feet with 3 to 4 bedrooms, durable materials, and the added value that comes with being river adjacent. At the core of this initiative is expanding home ownership for families between 100 to 120% AMI. These are working households that are often priced out of these new construction properties. Through phased development, this project increases supply, stabilizes the housing market, and creates a real wealth building pathway for families, all while honoring the island's legacy. So I'm gonna walk you through how we'll execute this. And I'm sorry, I'm taking a lot of time. So these are the phases. I've got to be really brief with this slide. These are the 3 phases we're gonna go through here. We're gonna have enough stackable funding to get a home buyer from 305,000 all the way down with a loan to 244. In the city of Petersburg, there's also funding available. Well, not funding, excuse me. There's also a tax exemption if you build a new construction home that will pursue for people. And that way they get 5 years of a tax abatement. So they're paying a heck of a lot less in taxes. So it's like wins on every front. These individuals also have these homes at 60 with automatic equity of roughly 60K. Move on. And for the Jarrett House, these are our path, our vision for the Jarrett House is to start working towards recognition and stabilization, which is the historic marker work, full restoration, and then moving into a long-term site for cultural advancement and shows and things like that. So finally, let me conclude really quick here. This is our website, www.ocrceg.org. This is how you can get involved. As you see here, what you see in these photographs are everyday people, residents, students, volunteers, partners who came together around a shared purpose. None of this happens with one individual. When people align around history, community, and opportunity, real change becomes possible. So that concludes my presentation. Sorry to take all the time.
No, thanks, Marlo. That was a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much for that. And just a couple quick points on that. I feel like a lot of the affordable housing discussions have centered on rentals and apartments, which are needed, but there hasn't been as much talk about home ownership. So the fact that you're addressing that is really cool. And like you said, preservation and development don't have to be mutually exclusive, right? And they really shouldn't be.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Marla. We really appreciate that. And with that, we're gonna jump over to Donovan Ripkema.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'll try to make sure that this is working. Hold on. So our just a preface. Our little firm works exclusively at the intersection of historic preservation and economics, and I'm unapologetic about that. However, it's stories like Marla's. The stories are really what's important. That's way 1,000 times more valuable than in the long run than the economic side. So I just thank you, Marla, for sharing that. It's fabulous. So I just want to quickly go through some kind of reality checks. First of all, you can't build new and rent or sell cheap. Can't be done unless you have really deep subsidy. And again, Marla's wonderful project with new construction, and Will just mentioned you have a combination, but you can't do it cheaply. Just you can't do it. Second, much of the development community responds to that with what used to be called the trickle down theory. Now they call it filtering. And here's the theory. Well, I'll build new stuff and it's going to be at the high end, but then people who are getting better economically, they'll move up to those new ones, and that opens a unit and then opens up a unit. And that's what the theory is. And it sounds fine, except it doesn't work when you're tearing down things at the bottom of the thing. All you're doing is creating more displacement, elimination, and lack of affordable housing. NOAA, you got to have NOAA. NOAA, that's got to be the central element of the whole affordable housing strategy. But there is no such thing as new NOAAs. There is no such thing. It has to be existing housing that provides that NOAA housing. What's the reality is we're systematically tearing down what's affordable and we're building what's not affordable. Now, here's going to be a challenge, and I don't care what the legislature passes, this is going to be a challenge for the next decade and beyond. Here's the good news. Over the next decade, 6 million new jobs created. That's wonderful news. A third of those jobs are going to fall into 3 job categories, kind of food service, healthcare, assistance. Median pay for those jobs, $23,000 a year. How much can those people afford for rent? $600 a month. So just find a unit in your community that's renting for $600 a month. That's why it's going to be an ongoing problem, regardless of the solutions that come up. Here's the other kind of reality, is that the newer a house unit is, the more expensive it is. And that a unit built prior to 1939 is half the cost of one built in 2020. The older the unit, overall, the lower the monthly cost. Now, around a little more than a third of all housing units in America were built more than 50 years ago. And often the critique you hear is, well, yeah, but those old houses, they're just standing up because the termites are holding hands or whatever. In fact, that's not the case. That the Department of Commerce does periodic, or HUD does periodically census of housing. And of the pre-1970 housing, the stuff that's over 50 years old, 2% of that is severely inadequate. So maybe that's the stuff that has to go. Another 5% moderately inadequate, but over 90%, in fact, is deemed adequate. Now, that doesn't mean so don't need a paint or a little work on the roof, but it does mean it's habitable, and whatever work needs to be done, in fact, is relatively modest in scale. It's older housing that is disproportionately meeting the needs of the lower end of the economic spectrum. About 37% of all housing units are built prior to 1970. 40% of those at 50% or less of the poverty level, more than 42% of those with between 50 and 99% of the poverty. So what's happening right now is that older housing is what is meeting affordable housing needs in the natural base. Now, we've broadened as a firm, and kind of, I think much of the preservation movement have broadened. We don't worry about thinking preservation just what happens to be designated at the moment. We think about the stuff that needs to be preserved, whether it's appropriately designated as historic or not. What's happening is we are literally ignoring the obvious right in front of us. Nationally, there's almost 5 million vacant housing units built before 1970. And of those units, 750,000 of them have been vacant for more than a year. The U.S. housing shortage is estimated to be about 6.5 million units. So if we just rehabilitated the currently vacant pre-1970 housing, we'd solve 75% of the nation's housing shortage. Now, the tool we have, great tool, low-income housing tax credit, wonderful tool, and since 1987 built about 3.5 million housing units, wonderful. Over that same time period, 11.5 million housing units built prior to 1970, gone forever. We'll never catch up. We'll never catch up if we're tearing down the stuff that's affordable and building what's not. So you take those two facts, 3.5 million housing built, 11.5 million lost forever. Well, what does that mean? It means that for the last 35 years, 900 houses every day, 7 days a week have been gone forever. And 8 million of those built prior to 1940, so among our most historic of housing units. And if you say, well, yeah, but the historic district's there to protect that stuff. Well, 96% of that pre-1970 housing has no protection whatsoever. So it's not a tool that's going to protect all of those, do it. If we had kept half of the pre-1970 housing that was demolished over the last 35 years, there would be no housing shortage in America. We have caused it ourselves by tearing down what's affordable. Now, here's the other reason, is a great firm. I wish I could claim that our firm was smart enough to do it, but we weren't. But another great firm in Washington looked at all of the low-income housing tax credit projects that were built, and here's what they found out, that the average new construction, or nationwide, average new construction per unit of low-income, using low-income housing tax credit, of $209,000 a unit. Of the acquisition and rehabilitation, so including the acquisition for rehab unit, 153,000. Meaning, if you care about extending taxpayers' dollars on the conservative side, if you're worried about providing more housing units on the liberal side, either way, you ought to be say our top priority ought to be putting those low-income housing tax credits in existing buildings. That's where it's having the most both economic, and it's not just a construction side. Same study found that the lifetime costs per unit were 40 to 70,000 more with the new construction units than with the rehabilitation. So here's what's happening. You'd say then, well, then ought to be an emphasis on existing units. Well, no, 55 to 60% of the units are coming from new construction. Now, sometimes the arguments made by the development community and others, housing advocates, others saying, well, you stupid historic districts, you're the one that are causing the housing crisis, the affordability crisis. Well, in most cities, maybe 3 to 6% of the land area is covered by historic districts. Well, if you can't figure out how to develop more densely in the other 97% of the city, maybe you're not smart enough to be in the development business. But then let's look at density. It's a legitimate argument. We need density. Public service efficiency requires density. So every place we've looked, every place we look, big cities, little cities. In fact, the most dense place in the city is historic districts. Whether you go a little place like Frankfort, Kentucky, Philadelphia, Washington, or LA, in every instance, the density in existing historic districts, in fact, is often twice as much, but always greater than what it is in the rest of the residentially zoned areas. So yeah, add density, but you don't have to add density in the neighborhoods that are already the densest in the city. And then I put this slide up because we just finished a month or two ago this study in Philadelphia. These older neighborhoods also have significant social impacts. In Philadelphia, the older neighborhoods, there's a greater share of the Black population, greater share of the Hispanic population live in those areas than in the rest of the city. The median household income in those older neighborhoods less than it is in the rest of the city. The median household costs, whether it's renter or buyer, is less in the older parts of the city, and importantly, greater share of Black home ownership in older neighborhoods than in the rest of the city. So even if you don't care about affordability, if you care, but you really care about social justice issues, then we have to look to older neighborhoods because that's where it's coming through. And you can't claim to be an environmentalist and be tearing down older housing. So here you tear down a relatively modest size house, 2,000 square foot house, that's 295 cubic yards of debris, 84 tons of crap going to the landfill. The embodied energy that was in that house, you threw away 900 million BTUs, and that's equal to 7,800 gallons of gasoline. 1 gallon of gasoline equals 40 aluminum cans, and we all are good about recycling our aluminum cans. So that means you tear down that one building, one little house, it means you've wiped out the benefit of the last 313,000 aluminum cans we all recycle. Uh, Finally, almost by definition, when we tear down an older housing unit, we tear down an affordable housing unit. If we want to solve the affordable housing crisis, we got to quit tearing down stuff. Thanks very much, and I'll wait for questions.
Hey, thank you, Donovan. The numbers don't lie, right? So we're so grateful to have a firm out there that's comparing the economics and the preservation angle. It's really a wonderful data set to have for everybody. And so with that, we're going to move into the Q&A section. And the first question I got was about how do we see the roles of architectural review boards going forward, and what can we do to ensure that there is still community input and oversight on these projects while also recognizing that the state is really pushing, streamlining the process and moving things faster? And Jenny, I'm sure that this might be something you want to speak to as well, but maybe Jenny and Paige on that. Yeah, and I think you're on mute, Jenny. Sorry about that.
I think in my experience, architectural review boards are often bending over backwards to deal with affordable projects, particularly in the recent past. And I speak about Charlottesville, where most of the new projects have actually been in historic districts, whether they've been affordable or not. And we've had a percentage of affordability guaranteed for new construction, or else paying in lieu of that in our city in Charlottesville. So I think that what Donovan was saying about the percentage of land in a historic district is very true. There's so many other places, but because they are desirable and generally very near transit and where there's density, these are places where people want to live and want to work, and that there is a lot of infill construction, a lot of adaptive use. And often people will actually say that a review board has come up with a more practical solution for perhaps retaining something that they don't have a demolition cost. So those are some of the things that I've seen experienced here. And because we have criteria for qualifications for review board members, they're often very responsible and can make helpful suggestions. And particularly if there isn't a long drawn out period of reviews, and if you're working together and coming in for preliminarily with a design to be reviewed, that can really cut the time down, which is one of the biggest things that Paige was talking about.
Sure, Paige, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think I agree completely with Jenny. I think, it's important for all local governments to remember that review board appointments, appointees change over time. And so there needs to be an ongoing and continuous investment in the education and training for architectural review boards as they receive increased pressure from the development community. I think being clear about purpose and goals and then articulating that clearly in alignment with the design guidelines makes it hard for the development community to challenge decisions by the review board. And sometimes where review boards, feel undue pressure is really because they're being asked to make decisions without the adequate training or background that they need. So I think that's where local governments could really consider investing wisely, especially these days.
Sure, sure. Well, and to continue on that page, there was one question when you had the graphic about the cost per key for a rehab project. Did that take into account historic tax credits, or does that kind of come out later once the credits are claimed?
That's a great question. I don't have insight into acquisition costs for either, vacant land or new construction projects or for acquisition of historic buildings. So I was simply looking at the raw construction piece of it. But there are additional costs, acquisition. There's the unknown project by project about what the return is on the tax credits. There are some projects that don't pursue tax credits. So I kind of discounted all of that and just looked at the pure development costs.
Sure. Thank you so much for that, Paige.
Something that I see that we're not taking advantage of very often is a combination of preservation tax credits and LIHTC or low income housing tax credits, particularly in larger projects that are going to have a rehab component and a new construction infill component. Layering the two, using them together would really provide financial leverage for a project. And that's something that I think as preservationists, we could try to pioneer and encourage using them in a tight economy that we have now. Anything that you could put together to maximize would be a benefit.
I completely agree with Jenny, and I've seen historic tax credit projects lost over some of the inherent conflicts between the two programs. And I think as a community, we should initiate a conversation with the folks who are on the low income housing tax credit side of things to try and reduce those barriers. For example, there's a requirement that you cannot have natural wood siding on low income housing tax credit projects. It all has to be synthetic. So navigating that becomes a challenge and a strain for the development community, and some developers will just opt into one or out of the other program because of it.
Sure. Well, thanks, Paige. And then Donovan, kind of a similar question for you was about could you explain a little bit more about the lower monthly cost for older housing versus new housing, and maybe how y'all came to that conclusion, or what evidence you have for that?
Oh, sure. We just took census data on housing, and what we did in the Philadelphia study, in the same methodology that we've used elsewhere, is we to identify uh, what constitutes older housing. We take, in the case of Philadelphia, we took census blocks, and census blocks is usually 5 or 6 city blocks. It's just kind of neighborhood, small scale. And we looked at census blocks where over 70% of the housing stock was built prior to 1950 in the case of Philadelphia. Otherwise, if you went later than that, you'd include everything in Philadelphia. So to Philadelphia, and then looked at census data on what the housing cost was for both renters um, and homeowners in both those categories in these older neighborhoods, and that was about a third of Philadelphia that fell in this older neighborhood category with the rest of the city.
That's great. Yeah, thanks, Donovan. Yeah, well, you can't get better primary source information than the census, right? So, and Marlo, I have a question for you as well, and that's just what has the feedback been with the community at Pocahontas Island, the idea of new construction and rehabbing existing structures, and did it take some conversations to get folks comfortable with that? Were they supportive from the beginning, or how did you get to this point?
The support has existed from the beginning. We need more families on Pocahontas Island. I mean, it's an older community. Most of everybody, I'm like one of the youngest people, and I'm in my 40s. I mean, that says something. And so we need more people living here to be a part of the advocacy work. And so that's the reason why we wanted to tackle the affordable piece. And so they're very supportive of what we're doing. Then we're also going to be working with some of the current residents to help them rehab some of the homes that they may own on Pocahontas Island, because some people own multiple homes here too.
Sure. And also another question for you, Marlo, was how can folks support your work at OCR?
OCRCEG.org. Thank you so much for asking. It's www.ocrceg.org. You can go on the website, sign up for the newsletter, come see us at Stories by Candlelight here in Petersburg. We're doing some remarkable things. So thank you for that question.
Absolutely. And then one other just sort of comment that was interesting was there are some preservation groups, specifically, I think in Columbus, Georgia, that have used revolving funds really effectively to basically marry a preservation group purchasing a building kind of at the low end and then reselling it for the purpose of affordable housing. And it does seem like something that even at Preservation Virginia we should explore and think about, what might our role be and again putting our money where our mouths are and tackling this kind of thing. But have y'all seen examples of that where nonprofits who specialize in historic preservation are also working specifically on affordable housing?
Well, I think the Historic Macon Foundation is one that has done a lot of that. They've also done a lot of the market rate housing, but they're really in the development business. And I think they're maybe the premier preservation advocacy organization in the country, but really doing it. So,
Sure.
and evidencing that it can be done.
Right. I might need to make a trip down there then. So, I think we are over time. I believe that's all the questions we have here. But folks, this is a very dynamic, ongoing conversation. Again, we want to be part of the solution. I think the data from Donovan, the feedback from developers to Paige, the on-the-ground work that Marlo and her organization is doing, and then Jenny, who consults on all of it. I think that we hope that you got something out of today's conversation from these various perspectives. I think this is a type of webinar we should have again, maybe even quarterly, because this is just not going to go anywhere anytime soon. But we really appreciate y'all's time. The last thing I would end on is that our legislative reception, which is an opportunity to hobnob with elected officials from the General Assembly or the governor's office, is this coming Tuesday, February 10th. At a location called Redbird Social here in Richmond. And we'd love to have strength in numbers at that as we make the case for historic preservation's role in issues like affordable housing. So we hope to see you next Tuesday night. So with that, many, many thanks to our wonderful esteemed panelists. We appreciate y'all taking time today, a spirited conversation, and it's not going to end anytime soon. So we'll keep talking. Thank you all.